League of Women Voters, the NAACP, and the News-Gazette. I welcome you to tonight's candidate forum. This forum is for candidates for the Republican primary for Champaign County Sheriff. And the candidates are Ellen Jones and Gregory Worrell. I'm the moderator. The questions for the candidates come from the audience, and so I would encourage anyone in the audience that has questions about this race, submit them, and members of the League and NAACP will be collecting them. Also, we have timekeepers, and the timekeepers keep the candidates on track as they have equal time for opening, closing, and questions. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes for an opening statement. I'll then ask for the questions submitted by the audience. The candidates have 1 minute for each of these questions, and at the end, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement, and they alternate beginning the question. This particular debate is not being broadcast live, but will be rebroadcast numerous times on the City of Champaign TV, cable TV network. It's also available on the City of Champaign website and on YouTube, and those times will be made available to you at the end of the night. So by an earlier drawing, Mr. Worrell is going to begin the debate, and so we will start with opening statements.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Greg Worrell. Phonetically, that's spelled war, then the letter L, Worrell. That makes it very easy. I'm seeking the position of Sheriff of Champaign County on the Republican ticket. I'd first like to thank the Urban League of Women Voters, NAACP, and the City of Champaign for hosting tonight's occasion. Thank you very much. Very nice. I have 40-plus years in law enforcement, 20 years in the United States Air Force, where I retired as a law enforcement specialist. The remaining years were here in Champaign County and police departments. I served as chief in Thomasboro and was the founder of Neighborhood Watch. I have earned an associate arts degree in law enforcement and a Bachelor of Science degree in criminal justice. I am energetic, professional, and have a very congenial attitude with whom I come in contact with. I keep my character and aspirations in high esteem. I am proactive instead of reactive. As sheriff, I take an oath to protect and defend and serve the people of Champaign County. I will bring in a new era of professionalism and the feeling that everyone will have the opportunity for promotion without falling into any type of favoritism within the department. My goal during this election season is get to know all the constituents by meeting with them and address their concerns. I want to ensure that they can feel that my door is always open. People want to feel confident that they have selected the finest professional that is seeking the position. That is why I am highly confident that I fit that agenda. So please vote for me, Greg Worrell, on March 20. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Good evening, everybody. First, I want to thank my wife, April, for putting up with this challenge and this process, and my family that's here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a 28-year veteran of the Champaign County Sheriff's Office. Worked no other full-time job in my career except for right out of college. I started out having the honor to serve as a corrections officer, and throughout my career I've been a deputy, an investigator, a sergeant, lieutenant, captain, jail administrator, and now have the opportunity to serve as the chief deputy. I hold a Bachelor of Science degree from Illinois State University in Criminal Justice Sciences. I have many postgraduate credits. I'm a graduate of the 261st session of the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia. I also graduated from from the Northwestern University of Police Staff and Command at Northwestern in the Chicago area, and the National Institute of Corrections Jail Administrator Training. I have years of experience in running the jail. It's a large component of the sheriff's responsibility to run the jail, and generally complex matters which involve much more than an average police officer would deal with on a daily basis. The Sheriff's Office is a $12 million budget with approximately 150 employees who work under 5 different labor agreements. In addition to participating in the bargaining of those agreements, I manage them on a daily basis. While serving as the Chief Deputy the past 4 years, I've helped implement body cameras, worked to have Narcan in all of the police and law enforcement deputies in the field and at the jail when we have people released from the jail. I've worked diligently to find ways, including federal grants, to reduce the length of stay for those with seriously mental ill, and will continue to find alternative to incarceration for those that are suffering those illnesses. And lastly, I played an integral role as a liaison between the Champaign County Board and the Sheriff's Office. So in our job interview that we have here tonight, I hope that you'll find me very worthy of your vote.
Thank you. First question, we'll start with Mr. Jones. Could you describe the major duties and responsibilities of the sheriff?
The major duties of the Sheriff's Office include the jail administration. We're required in every county to have a jail. We provide law enforcement to about 1,000 square miles, about 50-something, 55,000 people that aren't already in the incorporated villages. And the Sheriff's Office is the enforcement wing of the court. No valid court hearing is going to take place without a judge, a court reporter, and a sheriff. So out of those 3 divisions, the major responsibilities of the sheriff primarily rest in law enforcement and corrections. When we have folks that are assigned, that are incarcerated in the jail, it's our job to provide constitutional, appropriate, and medical and other care for them while they're in our custody, and make sure we do the best to get them out of there in no worse condition than when they came in.
Thank you. Mr. Worrell, could you describe the major duties and responsibilities of the sheriff?
Well, the sheriff is the highest law enforcement officer in the county. He has the ultimate responsibility of making sure that the protection of you, your family, and your property are well protected outside the venues of local area jurisdictions. I believe that the sheriff's concern, of course, is, as my opponent has said, is the corrections and also security in the courthouse. And then lastly, we also have the administrative staff and patrol division. All of them work together harmoniously to provide the ultimate protection for our people. It's very important the sheriff stays on top of this and monitors how everyone is functioning and trusts that the staff he has are very confident and keep the machine well-oiled and functioning. Thank you.
Thank you. And could both of the candidates make sure that their mic is on, which should be a green light, green light, solid green light. Okay, thank you. Mr. Worrell, the current jail facility has been called inadequate. What is your opinion about the current facility and what should be done?
Well, there was a study, I researched some on the online, of a 2013 study reviewing the facility of Champaign County Satellite Jail, the main building itself, the courthouse. They found some deficiencies and so forth, but there are some things that need to be corrected and fixed, but there are some other issues as far as when we deal with the mentally ill and those that are on opiates and so forth, to provide appropriate staff of those personnel. I believe that we would have to currently look again at the condition of the satellite jail and see if there is a need, hopefully to stay within our budget restraints of trying to keep the jail functioning properly by making minimum corrections to that in the courthouse. Thank you.
Mr. Jones, do you want me to repeat the question?
Please.
The current jail facility has been called inadequate. What is your opinion about the current facility and what should be done?
The current facility is actually 2 different jails. The downtown jail in and of itself is completely inadequate. It is built and functions in conjunction with the satellite jail, which in and of itself is the newest jail and facility that can and does not necessarily need to be replaced. The downtown jail faces, based on a consent decree was signed with the Department of Justice, a whole lot of money and investment that's required for the American with Disabilities Act's compliance. The downtown jail has been determined by the multiple studies that it's not the best place to have. What we need to do is, instead of spending money to rehabilitate and do the ADA replacement project at the downtown jail, is work to close that expand the satellite jail so we can properly and appropriately add on the necessary beds, not all one for one, but the necessary beds that will give us the best situation under a single roof to provide correction service in Champaign County.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jones, what does the Racial Justice Task Force impact the Sheriff's Office?
The impact is that it's another piece of input that we all need to have. The recent findings from the Racial Justice Task Force are something that we've studied, we've looked at. We find that there's some items that we completely agree with. The impact upon the Sheriff's Office talks about the racial disparity in the jail. We want to make sure that we're working with our local law enforcement partners in the community to work on that. To that end, we'll work to increase training. We'll take a look at what performance levels are happening with our deputies. Training that should increase in the future has to do with simple but yet difficult concepts called implicit bias, and how we can change and educate our staff into what it is that they need to do and how they can remove their internal biases and just be effective in their enforcement.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Worrell, how does the Racial Justice Task Force impact the Sheriff's Office?
I think it impacts the Sheriff's Office greatly. It's very important that the Sheriff be well aware of that type of task force and its findings. It's very important to ensure, as my opponent had also said, that training is ultimately responsible of getting the persons trained and understanding any deficiencies that we may have within the jail. I truly believe that the better we can do to ensure that we don't have these indifferences and fair and equal treatment throughout the satellite facility and main jail is our ultimate priority, to make sure that they are treated fairly. Thank you.
Mr. Worrell, with the current opiate crisis, how should personnel and facilities change to address the situation?
Well, it is becoming more of a problem. We have problems with our ones that are incarcerated that are affected by opiates. We've had staff before that were paid higher wages, but in the recent past, it has dropped down in staffing and reduced on type of salaries, and I think that we have a problem that we need to look at staffing to help deal with that, and more trained professionals that can maybe separate them and have on the side a training, get some type of help for them, and hopefully that we don't see them as a returnee. But there's a lot of times people need the help, and we need to have the appropriate staff to help deal with that problem.
Okay, Mr. Jones, do you want me to read the question? With the current opiate crisis, how should personnel and facilities change to address the situation?
The personnel need to be trained to recognize the indicators of impairment for somebody who's high with an opioid. They need to be educated into what the process of an opioid withdrawal is. They need to be educated into, if they find somebody who's exposed, to how to reverse that if they're overdosing. And these are all steps that have already been taken. In regards to change in the facilities, we don't have a change that's needed at the satellite jail, which is our primary booking area. Again, we've provided Narcan, we've provided nursing, we've trained the deputies and the corrections officers, the medical staff that's there. So what we're going to continue to do is focus and try to find diversionary options in the community, where those that are just suffering from addiction but not necessarily violent have alternatives. And with this community having lack of resources for detoxification and other issues, it would be nice if those services exist so somebody wouldn't be pushed to that brink where they had to touch the criminal justice system in that position.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jones, what is the biggest challenge facing the Sheriff's Office, and how do you plan to address it?
Well, the biggest challenge is quite frankly the facilities, the jails, and the ultimate disposition of getting out of the Sheriff's Office downtown facility, finding a location for the law enforcement division in some area within the county's control, and adding on beds to the satellite jail for the proper care and custody. I've said it before, it's not that we need a full replacement of all the beds to keep our capacity at 313. It's just a mere addition of a pod with some other specialty management pod at the satellite jail so that we can properly manage them, as well as increase our ability to provide programs, services, training, general ed. There's religious services, AA, NA, all of those will be part of this process. Add to that, though, the sheriff is going to need to work with the county board, and as seen previous discussions, funding is very limited. So to get this project done is going to take some creativity and some ability to work with the policy board and find the money to complete that task.
Thank you. Mr. Worrell, what is the biggest challenge facing the sheriff's office, and how do you plan to address it?
Well, it's kind of a twofold question, I think. There's a couple of things. Number one, as my opponent mentioned, as far as the jail facilities, eventually we need to look at a point in time where we can maybe combine the two under one roof. The unity of span of control and unity would help us to collate everything into one location. I think another important thing to look at also is that staffing. Folks within the facility feel that for their life and their future, that their promotion system is failing and it doesn't promote those that have higher tenure to get the higher jobs. We need to take a look at that. That's something that's going to be one of my top priorities, to ensure fairness across the board and equal ability to get promoted with your years of tenure. It's worked under the previous leadership of Sheriff Brannigan. I think we need to bring that back. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Worrell, this is kind of a follow-up question. Is it important for the sheriff's office to consolidate their resources and work out of one location?
Ideally, yes. Ideally, I believe it is very efficient. In the somewhat near future, if we can collate everything into one location. The sheriff's office and the staffing would be in one location along with the jail facility and so forth. I want to make sure that, for the security of the jail and staffing, that we have adequate protection and everything works cohesive. And I believe, other than maybe the courthouse, that we can someday see that we can combine the two locations into one without costing a large amount of money for our taxpayers. Thank you.
Mr. Jones?
It's absolutely imperative. We've operated under two facilities for the last, since 2004 when we built the two. And right now we have bifurcated services. You've got to have a supervisor at each building, you've got staff at each building, and they have different schedules. We're very fortunate that right now at the administrative offices, the sheriff is upstairs of the downtown jail. Our lowest population, our lowest staffing. If there's a problem in the downtown jail, we can send assets downstairs. And we have done that before. The same is true with the courthouse. Ideally, we'd be in the same spot. Unfortunately, I don't get to interact daily with the jail administrator or the lieutenants because my admin office is upstairs in the administrative wing with the law enforcement. Thankfully, with technology, we're able to Skype and I can have a face-to-face video conferencing with my jail superintendent, but I certainly look forward to the time when our offices are commingled and we're able to have a consistency in leadership and message all throughout the board. Before we go on to the next question, promotions based on tenure is well beyond today's law enforcement. We need to have it based on ability.
Okay. Mr. Jones, how do the concealed carry regulations impact the sheriff's office work with citizens, and what, if any, concerns do you have about concealed carry reciprocity?
I have zero concerns about concealed carry reciprocity. It has no negative impact upon the sheriff's office. I look upon it greatly. I've many presentations and conversations both with those that are training for concealed carry or those groups that are known to be active concealed carry folks. The conversations that take place are be wise and to communicate. And our contact, since this has been in effect in Illinois, we've had zero negative outcomes. And that has a lot to do with the type of people that are carrying illegally. So I fully support it.
Mr. Worrell, how do the concealed carry regulations impact the Sheriff's Department work with citizens, and what, if any, concerns do you have about concealed carry reciprocity?
Well, I support concealed carry. I think it's important, but on that same guideline, I think training is ultimately responsible to make sure that the person is adequately trained. You have deadly force that you have to be aware of your surroundings, and where, if God forbid, if somebody has to discharge a firearm for their own protection, where that round is going. We've been trained through our police training that we have to be conscious about that. Sometimes it's a split decision, so sometimes it takes a very trained person, but I believe our society will help maybe save a life someday when it gets to a point where somebody's going to come at somebody with their firearm, and they'll have a right to defend their lives and save themselves instead of being a victim. So with training and proper running on the procedure, I think if you conceal carry will do justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Worrell, how do you feel about working with multiple unions?
I believe working with multiple unions, if you're staying within the guidelines of what the unions require, I think is great. I used to belong to a union years ago when I worked for a department store back in Michigan. And the union did me great service. They felt that I was getting mistreated from a store manager, and my union rep came and pretty much laid the law down and said, no, I'm protected from the union, and I was so happy. I'll never forget that day, and that was back in the early 70s. So I think unions can work great, very supportive, and we have an open-minded communication at all times with them, and I'm all for them.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, how do you feel about working with multiple unions?
Excited. I mean, it's something that I do every day. Again, I've been part of the negotiations of the labor agreements in all 5 of these unions. We have a significant relationship that exists between the union representation and the deputies, the civilians, the men and women that work at the sheriff's office. Matter of fact, we embrace it. We look for opportunities in situations where the contract might prohibit something from happening just by black and white reading of it. Yet we've gone taking steps to negotiate side agreements with our employees and their representation to allow for something to take place so they can continue their employment. We've had others that we've worked they were on their way out, and we've had side agreements that allowed them actually to retire as opposed to be forced to quit before the end of their 20 years. So working with the unions is something I greatly look forward to.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jones, which pillar of the President's 21st Century Task Force do you relate to based on your current views of law enforcement? And can you explain what the President's 21st Century Task Force is for the audience?
President's 21st Century Task Force was a report that was released in 2015. It was commissioned by the Obama administration and led by a tremendous police chief out of the city of Philadelphia at the time. I would have to tell you that the one that gets probably relate most to me is going to be the trust and legitimacy aspect of it. That's the first pillar of the 6. And when you look at trust and legitimacy, you as a law enforcement leader, you recognize that it's not your job to be part of the problem, it's your job to be part of the solution. And your job is to listen and find ways to interact. And with transparency and leadership and creativity and just openness as one, what they've talked about is we recognize that law enforcement hasn't been perfect, we aren't perfect, and we're never going to be perfect. But to take and learn from the mistakes that we've made in the past, to make the adjustments that are necessary here today, and to proceed forward in the best interests of our community. More importantly, we're guardians, not occupiers. And that's the part that rings the most for me. Law enforcement needs to be guardians of our community.
Thank you. Mr. Worrell, which pillar of the President's 21st Century Task Force do you relate to based on your current views of law enforcement?
One simple word I'd like to say, ditto. My opponent, he's explained a lot of it. I also like to further say that law enforcement career is a very rewarding professional career, and trustworthiness and professionalism and the trust of the public is ultimate as far as making sure that the people can feel safe, that they have the best person and the best job, the best location. I feel that by supporting the President of the United States of America here locally, here in Champaign County, we can make sure that this great county of Champaign stays as one of the finest in the entire state of Illinois.
Mr. Worrell, would you contact immigration officials if an illegal immigrant is admitted to the jail?
Yes. I believe that, I know that there's been a lot of discussion as far as ICE and detainees and so forth, and whether the detainee has violated any criminal laws within Champaign County. I'd like to look at that possibly to see if the federal government would assist us as an entity in Champaign County as far as funding and so forth to help shore up any costs it would cost the county and the Sally Jail to house them and to process them as we would for anybody else within the county. So I believe if it doesn't put any strain on our budget and we get some support, I would like to look at that as far as making sure that we do detain them.
Mr. Jones, would you contact immigration officials if an illegal immigrant is admitted to the jail?
Well, outside of a warrant for being an illegal immigrant, the Champaign County Sheriff's Office has no way to determine whether somebody is that. So what happens is when folks are arrested and people are confined to the jail, the fingerprints and the charge data is sent off to the Department of Illinois State Police, where they have the Bureau of Identification, and from there the reporting mechanisms are sent through, and the federal government, the ICE in particular, has the ability to look for people who may be already on their watch list. So it's not an active mechanism of contacting any federal agency on behalf of the Sheriff's Office. And again, I've said before, I'll say it again, the Champaign County Sheriff's Office is going to house anybody that's legally and lawfully presented to us, whether that be on a warrant or a court order, but not something that just an agent's affidavit stating that they believe this person needs to be detained.
And Mr. Jones, how has your previous experience prepared you for the position of sheriff?
Previous experiences prepared me greatly. Matter of fact, as having the opportunity to serve as the chief deputy for the past 4 years, there's times in which Sheriff Walsh has been out of the office and it's been my job and duty to run the day-to-day operations of the Sheriff's Office. Unfortunately, that's happening more and more lately as his spouse is ill and she's had to have some significant medical care. Day in and day out, I've been involved in decisions for hiring, for policy directions. My primary duty has been to implement new state-of-the-art policy procedure system we've had in place for about 4 or 5 years now. So all of these things have added up, including an active and functional relationship with the presiding judge and the state's attorney's office to work across all avenues of challenges that we face in our community and the criminal justice system. I'm happy to say that my experience has placed me in that position, and I don't take it lightly.
Thank you. Mr. Worrell, how has your previous experience prepared you for the position of county sheriff?
It has prepared me greatly. I have served 20 years in the United States Air Force and retired, and all of it was in law enforcement from day one. And I've continued my law enforcement career into the civilian world, and I'm currently working as a current police officer, and I have done so in Champaign County since 1982, whether it's from the military and also the current law enforcement position I'm in now. So through the years in the military and so forth, I've learned policies, procedures, rules, and regulations, keeping within standards, reporting, and so forth. To be very regimented, ability to be flexible, work as a team player. Gets a lot done when you have your team working with you to accomplish your goals. I've worked as police chief in a couple of towns. Like I said, I was founder of Neighborhood Watch, was instrumental for some towns that I've worked with, and it's helped in reducing crime. So I'm very happy to say that I'm well qualified.
Thank you. Mr. Worrell, what is the most challenging task for your people, those with boots on the ground, and how can you best support them?
Best support them is, I believe, to ensure that not only do they have the proper training, but the proper equipment to make sure they do their job. It does no good if they've been trained, but they're lacking certain equipment to get their job done due to lack of funds or whatever the case may be. So if they're trained properly and have the right equipment, and a sheriff instill the right aspirations and professional esteem and communicating with their public, I think we'll do well. Thank you.
Mr. Jones, do you want me to repeat the question? Please. What is the most challenging task for your people, or those with boots on the ground, and how can you best support them?
So the most challenging task for our men and women in the Sheriff's Office is not training, it is not equipment. The most important thing for them, the biggest challenge for them, is to feel supported. They have to feel supported both within the community for the work that they do, and they have to feel supported from within the administration, those of us that are at the top. We need to day in and day out, both as citizens as well as administrators, tell them thank you. That we recognize the work that they do, we appreciate the challenges they face. take it, the corrections division that day in and day out faces a group of folks that are highly violent and at times physically and mentally ill and very difficult. A group of men and women in a patrol car that go into a situation and they don't understand why it's there, but it's their job to calm that and settle it down. A group of men and women that work in the courthouse. They may have to deal with the recent divorce case or some other custody case or some other ugly thing. And they need to be thanked, and we need to continue to support them and make sure they realize that what they're doing is making a difference, even though they're not told every day.
Okay, thank you. And this is the last question we have, so with one more question and then closing. What has the present sheriff done well, and what would you change? Mr. Jones.
Dan Walsh has done a tremendous amount in the last 15 years, and especially in expanding the vision and the views. It's not been a black and white decision. It's going to be this way. We've looked for and continue to search for ways to compromise, for ways to work together, for input, reception, and decision-making process. That will continue. What will change is probably primarily going to be with the day-to-day operations of the men and women in the jobs. There's some things that our patrol staff are doing that slightly beyond what it is that is part of their general day-to-day activities needs to be changed so that they can get to the tasks that they have on hand. We're certainly going to stay involved in the Street Crimes Task Force and focused on the violence that exists in the community. In the jail, we're going to continue to work with our staff and try to come up with a way to consolidate our building and keep them moving forward and making sure they have a safe environment.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Worrell, what has the present sheriff done well, and what would you change?
Well, he's continued his dedicated service for his time spent. However, I feel that things that need to be changed are the avenues to make his door open to the public and to the community. It's Worrell too often that the sheriff, a lot of times you may not see other than on television or a current ad or something placed in the paper, actually be in your town and discussing you with the things that are pros and cons that are going on in Champaign County. I plan on having a first time ever quarterly meetings with all the towns where I can get down to them and have them come to me in a town meeting, and I can share with them information that I can share, and I can hear their concerns of every town in Champaign County. We work together as a network. And I think through that, as a glorified big neighborhood watch, we can ensure the safety of our residents. So keep an open door policy, I think, is a great thing to improve.
Okay. And then we'll go to closing statements, and Mr. Worrell, you're going first, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Again, I'd like to thank the Urban League of Women Voters, the NAACP, and the Champaign County, or the Champaign City of Champaign, for allowing us to have this facility tonight. I worked my entire life in law enforcement, way back many years ago. I've had aspirations from my father to do law enforcement, and I've continued forever, and I will still do that as long as I can. I've got great aspirations, high esteem, morale, esprit de corps, and congenial attitude, and a very good ability to talk to our fellow constituents who are very happy to talk with me. I get a lot of great feedback, a lot of great comments. In person, walking down to a store, meeting them on the sidewalk, they're happy, and I'm happy too, because I do have my ears open. I want to listen to their concerns. So I'm looking forward to all Republicans and Democrats out there, because I encourage you, the ones that have great friends and relationships, that you can cross over to the Republican side, because their names won't be on the Democrat ticket, to place your vote for Gregory Worrell for Democrat or for Republican Party, and you continue on with your Democratic voting of your preference. That's great, okay. So I'm looking forward to that, working bipartisan with Democrats, the Republicans, and all personnel that would like to vote. I need your support. I look forward to seeing you on March 20 and cast that vote for Greg Worrell, Sheriff of Champaign County. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So as sheriff, I won't rest on the laurels of the work that's been done. I won't rest on the laurels of the work that I have been involved in. I'll continue to demonstrate my belief that in order to be a good law enforcement administrator, you're going to have to be a keen observer, a participant in the solution, and a central party towards solving the problem. There's significant challenges that lay ahead for Champaign County and the sheriff ahead. Violence in the community, gun violence, domestic violence, whatever violence it may be, we must continue to work to provide the resources to help our families and our folks that are struggling in this regard. Opioid addiction, mental health, behavioral health, substance abuse, and lack of services in the community. Jail crowding, jail consolidation. There's capital replacement plans that have to be worked through because the county board continually kicks the can down the road and underfunds capital replacement and doesn't do anything with the deferred maintenance costs. I intend to appropriately leverage my experience and leadership gathered throughout the years as the vital conversations with the judiciary, the state's attorney, the employees, the community members, and one of the greatest lessons that I've learned over the past few years of working in our community behavioral health problems is that we must involve the people that are going through the same situation with life and learned experiences to have these conversations. I'll continue to encourage and embrace the guardian mindset for our law enforcement division. We're not an occupying force, as I said earlier. We have to promote public trust by initiating non-enforcement activities within our community, and we do that. Community Coalition, Walk as One events. We're going to build the public and trust by embracing this transparency. I talked with you about the policies and procedures that will be there. And in the county jail, we'll continue to provide the quality of care in a jail that's safe and secure for staff and the inmates. You know, the sheriff's office is a complicated business. It's even the most experienced police officer from the largest city, let alone a small town agency, cannot step into a sheriff's office and run the day-to-day operations. In that end, I'm fully supported and endorsed by our current four-term sheriff, Dan Walsh, our county clerk, Gordy Holton, treasurer, J.J. Farney, auditor, Diane Michaels, circuit clerk, Katie Blakeman, and retired treasurer, Dan Walsh, not because of party politics, but because I work with them and they know I can do the job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for participating. And we're going to have a brief break here while we prepare for the last